So you use this phrase that I really liked in your description of your research, uprooted from one setting and implanted to others. And I think that's the first use of the word implanted I've seen. So which other settings did you first begin identifying as being relevant to this research, and how did you begin to go about exploring these contexts, and like who did you contact, and like where did you go to start following those trails?
Thank you so much for the question. It's always wonderful to go back in memory lane and try to recap your process. And I think I should start even earlier and say that actually my initial interest and my initial wish of doing a PhD began when I listened to some Bwiti polyphonic music, and I was just captivated. So I initially really wanted to go into the extra pharmacological aspects of Bwiti initiation. So I wanted to look at the body elements, I wanted to look at the music. I really had a great interest to all of this. And then, as it often happens, then I started reading the literature, I started consulting people, I met with both other researchers, but I also discussed with some Bwiti practitioners and people who had got initiated. And I started really to kind of critically assess, where can I make a good contribution? And I kind of, one of the things, and maybe we'll get back to it, but one of the things that I really understood was that one of the most important principles of Bwiti is really secrecy and direct experience and personal engagement. And the process of coming as a researcher who wants to kind of just take out some information and convey it within an analytical frame, that just to me gradually seemed so wrong in this context. And I started thinking about maybe I can make a different contribution, also because I saw so many wonderful, really talented researchers had already written about Bwiti. I just discovered that everything was in French, so it wasn't available to me as a primarily English academic reader. So I started learning French. That's one thing, like one practical thing I had to start learning, and I started reading all these French papers, and I saw that even though Iboga and Ibogaine has been so globalized and is really being, as you said, implanted into so many different settings now, we didn't really have any qualitative research that documented what happened in this process of translation. So I became really interested in exploring that aspect. And then, as you say, it's a long process. I started looking for places where I could do fieldwork. So as an anthropologist, we base our analysis and our arguments on ethnographic field research. We go into a setting and we try to stay there as long as possible. Mainly, or we hope to kind of stay there for months, maybe even years, to really get into the life world of the people that we are studying with and that we're trying to understand. So there was practicalities that led me to consider certain retreat centers outside of Gabon that used Iboga. I really wanted to work with someone who focused on the ritual aspects, because that really interested me, all the relational aspects around the use of Iboga. So I wanted to work with somewhere where they had a lot of other therapeutic activities. I wanted to work with someone who had this more holistic approach to treatment. And then I must say that the process of actually then finding the retreat center where I ended up staying for 6 months, that was a process of trying to establish contact, trying to build trust, trying to go there and show my sincere intention to learn. And they also, of course, needed to see if they could welcome in a stranger to their facility. Like when you are undergoing an Iboga or Ibogaine treatment, you're obviously very vulnerable. So if I were coming with a lot of ego or whatever, it could probably be a problem. So it was just this gradual process of people being really kind and open and welcoming to me. So I stayed in this one retreat center for 6 months, and then I was in contact with many different Iboga providers that I did just interviews with, and not so much this ethnographic fieldwork. And then I also, in the beginning of my research, I discovered that there was a clinical trial happening. One of the first clinical trial that explored the therapeutic use of Ibogaine at the time. And I wrote the study director and asked if I could come and participate, and he was so kind. So I also went into that field, which was super exciting to see what happened with Ibogaine is put into a hospital setting. What else? Is there anything else I should say for this question? Yeah, no, just really that it's kind of snowballing when you start doing fieldwork, and when you start to be welcomed into the Ibogaine community and Iboga community. I mean, there was definitely instances where I needed help from people, especially when I was in Gabon, and I received that help when I asked for it. So I felt I've just been met by so many helpful people that have also guided me around, and through that process I have come to kind of construct these different settings, these different other settings that I've worked in. So it's not something that I couldn't curate it from the beginning. I had to go out and establish it with people.
Thank you so much for such a beautiful answer, and the organicity of your research really shines through in that. But something that you touched on, which I'd like to kind of open up a bit more, is the ostensibly and initially secret nature of a lot of this, and the relationality between that and Bwiti being an oral tradition, and I guess also the fact that you are treading in this world that involves a lot of kind of private processes and interior processes and things that might partly have taken place within this oral tradition but also be very personal to share. So I'd love to hear about kind of the ethics of representing some of this subject matter in text, and then how that relates to the oral aspect of the Bwiti tradition.
Yeah, I think this is a really important question when we talk about Bwiti and when we talk about Iboga, and also when we talk about psychedelic use in general, because as you say, psychedelic compounds put people in very vulnerable states, and it's very important that we as researchers, when we engage with people in these vulnerable states, that we know what we're doing and that we have the right state of mind and we have the right intentions. So I think it was something that I really, from the beginning of the research, I discussed a lot with people. I discussed it a lot with other fellow researchers who are also doing research in Gabon, because I think I'm part of a generation where you're really aware of the power dynamics of academic research. So it was a conversation that oftentimes came up, and we discussed it a lot. And then obviously not only discussing it with my peer fellows in academia, but I really discussed it with the people I met. So I would have these ethical conversations with the people during my fieldwork that I was interviewing, that I was working with, and really trying to follow their lead, especially when I was in Gabon, follow their lead in what remains something we need to preserve within the tradition for many different reasons, and what is something that we can actually talk about outside of the initiation community and the initiation context. And I really just follow that guiding. So I haven't touched upon anything that is kind of needs to be kept within this community of the initiated. I think there are so many other questions to ask and to explore with Iboga than those happening within the initiation communities. But also because I didn't kind of end up working with Bwiti, I kind of circumvented some of these ethical challenges a bit. In terms of the old tradition and the secrecy of Bwiti. And that was also completely a conscious decision for me. But I will say that working in the archives and working, as I briefly mentioned, working with these early written records of Iboga was definitely a process where I was very aware of the ethical challenges of interpreting the writings of someone who is describing an other, of someone foreign and oftentimes from a colonial power, describing a local from the Congo Basin. So I have been trying to kind of really have that post-colonial critical view when interpreting these materials. And then in terms of maybe also, because I have had this project, this both comparative but also a kind of follow the Iboga PhD project, I have had to really work a bit with competing ethical obligations throughout my research and weighting different ethical interests, because as an anthropologist you're really obliged to do no harm to the people you work with, your interlocutors, and you need to keep them safe and you need to represent them in the best way possible. And because I've worked with so many different fields and so many different people who have conflicting interests about what Iboga is, how it should be used, what it's good for, and what is an ethical way forward, I've really had to find a balanced way of merging this when I'm writing up my thesis especially. And I think in that process I've really been inspired by the non-extractive research ethics as they have been formulated by Kuritsin and Nakagawa, two Canadian scholars, where they write about doing non-extractive ethical research when you're working in transcultural fields and when you're working with many different people really involves intent, so that you're very obvious, you're very elaborate about your intention, your motives of doing research with the people you work with, why you're doing it. You need to be aware of how your results what kind of consequences your results might have for the people you work with. Then you need to work with integrity, both in terms of disseminating your work to the people you work with, so sharing what you do and thinking that your research really should be of the benefit of the people you work with and not the benefit just of myself getting a PhD degree or for the academic community, but really be of acute benefit to the people you work with. That's also a very important aspect of ethical research, I think. And then there is, and maybe that relates a bit, but focus on the process and not so much the product. So really focusing on the research process in itself. The conversation I have with people need to be meaningful. So I've tried to do my best to be present also when I've been in these therapeutic retreat centers to discuss the things with the clients and the patients, whatever they have been in each setting, what their challenges are and how they're feeling after the Ibogaine. So really also trying to make a contribution to every single individual that I've met on my way. And then finally, I think also what has been important for me in terms of ethics is also to take really serious the worldview that I encountered in Gabon, and to take Iboga seriously as an interlocutor in its own right. So really take seriously that Iboga as a non-human agent is also someone that I need to communicate with, and I need to try to understand, and I need to do my best to align myself with what it's trying to teach me and how Iboga wants me to communicate my research. So I think that has been maybe some of the main considerations I've given to this.
Again, thank you for an answer with lots of corridors that I'm very excited to walk further down, and also some resources that I might ask you for some links after as well. And I think that also leads quite nicely into my next question, which is around, you've described treading in these various realms, the archives, the befores, the afters, multiple retreats in different countries. So do you have a default way of describing your PhD at the moment? Like if you have to come out with a kind of elevator pitch, I guess is a horrible term, but like kind of tiny abstract of what it's all about, like what do you tend to say these days?
Yeah, I think you phrased this question really well, because obviously it's changing all the time, and it has been throughout these 3 years of my PhD already. But I would say right now I would describe my research as that I'm exploring the social life of Iboga and all its derivatives, Ibogaine, but also synthetic derivatives. We'll probably come back to that. But I'm exploring the social life of Iboga and Ibogaine across different settings in both history, in both time and in place. And across these settings, what I'm really interested in is tracking the ways in which Iboga is activated relationally for different uses, but also through cultivation, in order to kind of understand how Iboga emerges as as multiple remedies, I would say, with many different efficacies. So the word efficacy is something that I've really become captivated by, because I think it's so interesting to see how Iboga, and when it changes its form into these new formats, Ibogaine and so on, it's really also changing the way it's working, and it's changing its efficacy. And it has done so throughout history, depending on how people use it, how they engage it, how they mobilize it. And that's why I'm interested in understanding all these relational intricacies of using Iboga and Ibogaine. Maybe that was a long elevator speech. I think it was a bit. But
No,
yeah.
it was really beautiful, and I think it did justice to the shape-shifting nature that is very often an aspect of Iboga itself that gets mentioned, and really beautiful answer, and that also begs the question of Iboga and Ibogaine. Of course, they especially can't be used interchangeably when you're starting to think about their medical applications. But I actually have a question about the grammar. So you write Iboga and then a slash and then INE. So you bring them together. Some people put the INE in brackets. How do you feel about the phrasing of the two together, and the various ways that it's important to sometimes word them together but also differentiate them in speaking and writing?
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things that one of the biggest or the kind of most underlined teaching that I've gotten from these 3 years of research with Iboga and Ibogaine is really, as I said, the shape-shifting nature of this plant, this substance, this being, this medicine, all these things that it has become and has been. And this is also the reality in many of the retreat centers that I work with. People will have so many different forms of Iboga. Sometimes they will have the root bark, sometimes they will have the PTA version, sometimes they will use the TA, and oftentimes they use all of them, and even the HCl, but with different patients and at different times. And nevertheless, they often use just one word when describing Iboga. They say either Iboga or Ibogaine. And it says a lot what word people use. And I think this creature, this shape-shifting creature, this shape-shifting being, whatever we want to call it, I think it emerges differently for every one of us. And the reason why I put them together is really also for academic simplification when making an analysis, because I want to, in my project, I don't want to just focus on one of these shapes that Ibogaine and Iboga takes. I want to really see if I can connect all these new birthings, all these new siblings of Iboga back into one thing, because what we're seeing right now is really also an extreme proliferation of Ibogaine derivatives. So we have more than 200 synthetically produced alkaloids at the moment, and I think there is a sort of, even though there's obviously a sort of danger in clustering them together, making this abbreviation, because you can convey a simplification of what Iboga is, that Iboga is the same as Ibogaine, and I really don't want to do that, that's for sure. But I think it also has the power of saying that every time you talk about Ibogaine, even if it's synthetically produced without even involving any form of plant material from either the Tabananza Iboga plant or from the Wakanga africana plant, it's still tied back to Iboga. So I think the abbreviation also helps you to make that statement in a way. So that's maybe the force of the abbreviation.
That's a really, really beautiful answer, and I think it does definitely reveal a lot, that there are all of these commonly used things like TA, but that people don't necessarily bring that word into what they conceptualize or say about the experience. So something that I'm thinking about in relation to kind of retreats and how people look at these experiences they're having with both Ibogaine and Iboga is the conceptualization of healing, which is very often seen as this kind of journey that people may be on in general life or in kind of wider psychedelic discourse, and there's this kind of popular conceptualization that Iboga and Ibogaine can end your healing journey and bring you to a place where you're kind of the other side of it. But how does this map onto or or clash with or percolate with the befores and afters of the people that you encounter in your research on the retreats?
I think you're really pointing to something here that is of immense value, both to people who are seeking out Iboga, Ibogaine, but also to the rest of us trying to understand what it's actually doing, what is happening. Because I think you're right that in the experience, at least of many of the people that I have encountered and that I've spoken with about their Iboga and Ibogaine experiences, have been that the experience oftentimes entail both components. So both this more transformative aspect where you speak about a before and an after, some radical event, and then this more incremental or gradual process of healing where you are slowly integrating, you're slowly developing, you're slowly changing based on an event that kind of gave you some insights. And I think for really the majority, healing with or going through therapy or interacting with Iboga and Ibogaine involves both of these dimensions, both some sense of a before and after, and then this more gradual process of healing. I think it was, if I need to say a bit more about the transformative aspect of it, one of the sentences that I heard the most outside of Gabon when I have been in retreat centers is, or a kind of a trope that has been formulated, said to me so many times, is that Iboga and Ibogaine is like a reset. And I think this terminology of a reset, it really speaks to the experience of many people that there is something of a before and an after. There is something that kind of changes radically with this dialogue and ingestion of this plant. And I think this reset, at least how I understand it through the work that I've done and the experiences that I have gathered and analyzed, is that it's a reset that's not only to do with kind of the body, it's definitely to do with the body, and it's definitely also a sensory reset. I think that's one of the things that I've noticed the most, is this sensory enhancement or complete change of your sensory inputs that many people report as a radical before and after experience after an Ibogaine. That's one aspect of it, and then there's also a reset related maybe more to your sense of self and your way of understanding yourself. So I think that's the transformative aspect, and then the gradual aspect is really all about taking that experience, both the insights, the somatic and the sensory impressions that you had, and then gradually implementing them into your daily life, integrating, as we say in the psychedelic sphere, in the psychedelic field, really trying to bridge that experience with your daily life, and that's where the healing continues to unfold in a way.
That is a really interesting differentiation between the acute experience and I guess what might be conceptualized as an afterglow, that period of time where you're integrating. And a lot of people talk about the neuroplastic window, this time when you're maybe more able to kind of change patterns, take on or put down habits. And I'm wondering what kinds of tropes and vocabularies around that you've been noticing?
Yeah, I think that's also a really good question, because I think I would like to make a caveat or sort of a nuance here, because I think there is, even though we've had so many years now of great research, of so many good conferences, of really great journalists who have written about psychedelics, that has tried to nuance the picture of what psychedelics are and what they can do, and also including what is Iboga and what can Iboga do. I think there's still a tendency sometimes to view the psychedelic experience as a magic pill that will just take away all your problems, that will just resolve your suffering, and that will take you to that destination where you want to be. And I think this has, at least in my experience, both when I was working on my master thesis fieldwork, I was working in the Danish psychedelic community. I witnessed it there, but I've also witnessed it a lot during my PhD fieldwork, that it kind of attracts people to think to these retreat centers, psychedelic retreat centers, thinking that I just need to save up money so I can go to this psychedelic retreat, and then it will fix my substance dependence, it will fix my anxiety, it will fix my depression. And oftentimes it's not like that. And also with Iboga and Ibogaine, it's not like that. And I think what is maybe not so commonly talked about with Iboga and Ibogaine is that the afterglow phase that we know from other psychedelic compounds can sometimes be a bit pushed, so a bit further down the road than what you experience with some of the other psychedelic compounds. So usually we talk about the afterglow as this like nice feeling, a nice feeling of connection after your psychedelic experience. And I've really encountered many people who thought that they would have this kind of afterglow feelings after their Iboga Ibogaine treatment, but instead they felt naked to their bones. They felt super vulnerable. They felt super sensory receptive in a completely over just in complete too much, like just having too many impressions, just being too receptive, just being too overwhelmed, being too emotionally overwhelmed. And I think it has to do with many aspects. One of the aspects is that people often experience insomnia after Iboga and Ibogaine, and that makes you even more sensitive. And then if you have some obligations that you need to go back to, you have to maybe go back to your family, your children, you have some responsibilities you need to take care of, and you feel this open, very receptive and sensory vulnerable place, then the afterglow can instead become a very challenging process actually. So I think there's an importance to maybe nuance a bit the idea of afterglow when it comes to Iboga and Ibogaine.
The way that you language that struck such a chord with me, and that kind of the fusion of over openness or unhabitual openness and overwhelm coming together is just so visceral and so beautifully expressed, and just resonated a lot. So something that you touched on there was working with kind of the wider Danish psychedelic community, and something I've noticed is that Iboga in the UK as well, and most psychedelic contexts I've been in, it kind of is somewhat separate in the way it's conceptualized, and people gravitate towards it eventually or not, but it's definitely not kind of in the mix necessarily, or hasn't been in general in my personal perception. So something that I'm curious about is the kind of Danish psychedelic community and Danish academic community ready for the kinds of things that you're finding out, and how is the world in which you're doing this research equipped to actually kind of hold the experiences that people are having?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's very similar to the UK context in many ways. So I'm Danish, but I have my PhD position in Norway. So I've been following a bit both communities, both the Norwegian psychedelic community and the Danish psychedelic community, and they have like similar aspects to it. So they have a similar juridical conditions. Iboga is illegal and you can't use it. And there are very few underground facilitators actually that facilitates Iboga and Ibogaine ceremonies. Oftentimes the people in Norway and the people in Denmark who seek out Iboga and Ibogaine, they go to retreat centers in Europe or even across the Atlantic in Costa Rica, Mexico. Or in Southern Europe, not just staying within their own European context. But there is actually a quite, at least there is psychedelic substances in Denmark have really increased in popularity the last 10 years. It's been very evident in the news, in the media, but also with new psychedelic research centers opening, conferences being hosted. So there has really been a change of the public sentiment towards psychedelics. And even though I think that Iboga and Ibogaine is still a bit too unknown of, and therefore also a bit more, people have a bit more skeptical view on Iboga and Ibogaine compared to ayahuasca and psilocybin, then you can still feel that psychedelic wave in Denmark seeping into interest in Iboga and Ibogaine. So I have had many people contacting me, Danish and Norwegian people who have had Iboga and Ibogaine experiences and who wanted to share their experiences so that I could maybe make use of it in my research. And I mean, in terms of how open society is to then take in these experiences and maybe also to take in the findings of my research, I think I'm very fortunate to have people interested in my work, maybe not from political segments, but definitely from civil societies, people who are seeking alternatives, because people in Denmark and in Norway are not satisfied with the psychiatry. There are more and more people seeking out alternative forms of treatment, especially for substance dependence, but really for anxiety and depression.
That difference between politics and civil society is a really important distinction to draw. And then I think another distinction that occurred to me when you were talking about people seeking alternatives and treatments and something else is that I think one of the ways that Ibogaine specifically has most been welcomed in the global north has been in relation to addiction treatment, which is a term in itself that could be unpacked extensively or infinitely. But how do you see the somewhat but not necessarily distinct realms of psychospiritual seeking and addiction treatment, and how do they maybe coalesce in your research?
Yeah, the two are completely related, for sure. And I think it's much more a question of the audience that you write to and that you speak to if you make the distinction of psychospiritual healing or psychological, psychosocial healing, and then addiction treatment or substance dependence. Because obviously, substance dependence is a process. It's a multifaceted condition. It's not only related to the somatic dependence. It's also related to the social environment. It's related to psychological habits. It's related to emotional traumas. All these different things. So when you address addiction, when you address substance dependence, you oftentimes need to address all these aspects to actually get through that dependence and be freed of it. And that, for many people that I've met, involves some form of psychospiritual healing. And I think that the other things to say to it is that I've met many people who came to Iboga and Ibogaine actually with a very sort of agnostic approach, where they just wanted the detox. They just wanted to get through their withdrawals. They just wanted to be freed of their substance of dependence. And then during the experience, they were convinced that there was something different, that there was a spiritual aspect of their experience, and that there was a spiritual aspect of their healing process as well. And many people have reported to, really have changed their mind in terms of how they see Iboga after their experiences, from seeing it as a medicine that can cure their addiction to seeing it as a sort of intelligent being with whom they are in a dialogue and who kind of showed them their way to another way of life.
That's really beautiful. And I hope this is an okay question to ask. We can skip it if preferable, but I'm very curious about how your personal life has changed while doing this research, and kind of any kind of interpening of insights and attitudes with the way that you live.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, what this research has really demanded of me, first and foremost, not only of me, but also of my husband, is a lot of traveling. Like a lot of traveling. Being from one country, doing a PhD in another country, and then doing fieldwork in 3 different other countries has really been an immense process of uprooting, and I've had this immense sense of uprootedness during the process. And I think that making the research with Iboga, with Ibogaine, and with all these wonderful people that I've met on the way has really given me a way to conceptualize home in a different way in this uprootedness, to find a different form of contact through a way of listening and a way of intentional action. And I think it transforms you when you do anthropological research all the time. And I think the way really in which this project has transformed me has been through my engagement with the plant, and through the engagement with the plant through other people who have learned or taught me how to interact with the plant.
That's super beautiful, and I love the metaphorical re-engagement with the idea of what rootedness means is such an amazing way to conceptualize that. So my final question is about the Iboga Leadership Summit itself, and what your participation in this dialogue means to you at this point, and how you feel that conversations such as this can further or change collective understanding around Iboga and Ibogaine.
I must say I'm very honored to have gotten the invitation to participate in this summit. I'm very excited to go, and I think it's immensely important that it's located in Libreville in Gabon, because I think what is really essential from now on is that we engage Gabon in all aspects of the globalization of Iboga and Ibogaine. So that means engaging them in terms of discussions around cultivation. How should Iboga be cultivated? How should Ibogaine be extracted from which plants? But also in terms of how should we process the plant material into Iboga PTA, Iboga TA. Conversations, discussions around trade, around what is a proper, respectful use. I think it's just important in all these aspects to engage a dialogue with the people who are really the ones, with the people in the place, which is where Iboga has its cultural and its ecological roots. This is the origin of the plant and of all other forms of interest and all other forms of development that has been around Iboga and Ibogaine afterwards. So I think it's really important that we go back to that place and we have all these conversations there. And also really to avoid this tendency that sometimes can happen, that ideas are imposed on a country about what is the best way forward. So for instance, this idea that's sometimes imposed right now from people that it's best that we don't use Ibogaine from Tabanansi Iboga because the plant is endangered in Gabon. I think this is a wrong way of framing the conflict. I think we cannot make decisions on behalf of a different nation, on behalf of a different people. I think we need to have all these conversations with the people in Gabon.
Thank you so much. I wish this wasn't the end of this interview. This has been a really, really brilliant conversation.
Likewise, Ros, it's been really great. Thank you so much for all your great questions and your interest in my work.